our State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. Today, Alabama lawmakers completed the 10th day of the 2023 regular session. That means we are 1/3 of the way finished. The Economic Development Incentives Package, known as the Game Plan, finally made it to the House and Senate floors today. We'll start in the House, where all 4 Game Plan bills were debated and then eventually passed unanimously. House Bill 241 from Representative Danny Garrett would renew the Alabama Jobs Act, the state's primary industrial recruitment statute, which is set to expire in July. It would increase the cap the state can leverage toward projects by $25 million each year, topping out at $470 million total in 2027. It also increases the growing Alabama site development grants from $20 million to $30 million. Those are the dollars used to help local communities improve sites to attract industry. Garrett handled the bill on the House floor.
HB 241, which is enhancing Alabama's Economic Progress Act. This bill will increase the Jobs Act's incentives by $25 million a year for 5 years. It will focus more on site development by moving innovation and tech accelerators and underrepresented businesses that are currently under the Jobs Act into a new bill that Representative Daniels will talk about in the Innovate Alabama group. It also adds renewable energy as an eligible project to recognize the demand for clean energy and new energy developments.
House Bill 257, also from Garrett, would allow the State Industrial Development Authority to accelerate development of industry-ready sites. It would also create the Alabama Site Development Fund to allow up to $2 million to pay for site assessment and development grants. That's where local industrial development boards can apply to have a site either assessed or improved.
And what it will do will allow the State Industrial Development Authority, which is already in existence, to facilitate the development of industry-ready sites. They currently provide an appropriation of $2 million for industrial development. This will continue that $2 million annual appropriation, but it also will expand the use of the funds to include site assessment. So it's a pre-development type thing. A lot of cities or counties may have sites of land they don't own. They're not sure if it's really economically feasible for industrial site. So this would allow them to use some of those funds to make an assessment to determine if they can get a grant to develop that site.
House Bill 247 from Representative Anthony Daniels aims to grow the state's innovation economy and support underrepresented businesses and enterprises, especially in rural areas. It would allow up to $25 million in Innovate Alabama grants through the Alabama Innovation Corporation.
The state of Alabama, we created the Innovation Commission. And that commission focused a lot of its attention on looking at the assets of Alabama, figuring out ways for us to improve from an image standpoint, but also focusing on our technology and entrepreneurship scene. And so that was the focus and the charge for that particular commission in 2020. In 2021, based upon the recommendations of the committee, Secretary Rice and the Hoover Institute, in partnership with many of our fine corporate partners within the state of Alabama and members of the legislature that served on the commission, their recommendation was to create the Innovation Corporation. The Innovation Corporation's primary focus is to engage veteran-owned, woman-owned, minority-owned small businesses in the state of Alabama, as well as helping develop those particular businesses.
House Bill 240 from Representative Cynthia Allman would amend the Jobs Act to require the Department of Commerce to publish all incentivized project information online. That information will include the return on investment from incentives used.
This is the transparency portion of the Jobs Act. It's one of the 4 bills that comes to us through the Jobs Act. Basically, it is what it says it is. It is requiring the Department of Commerce to publish on its website certain information about economic development incentives. Once they enter into an economic development incentives agreement, they will publish those details on their website.
The Senate also took action on the transparency bill, but with an amendment from bill's sponsor, Senator Garland Gudger. The amendment creates the Joint Legislative Advisory Committee on Economic Incentives to give the legislature greater oversight of the incentives process at the Department of Commerce. During debate, Senator Mericka Coleman wanted to know if there were financial protections for the state should any businesses receiving incentives break the law.
In the event that we have a situation like what happened at Hyundai with one of their suppliers that was cited for child labor issues, is there an opportunity for us to claw that money back if they violate not just that particular law, but any crime? If they commit a crime, do we have an ability to claw back that money and they pay those incentives back to the state of Alabama?
Fortunately, because of the way that we do our incentives now, they have to pay into the state before they get the rebate. Unlike the way we used to do it, is
well,
go out and borrow money.
We gave them the incentive up front. Correct.
It was much harder to claw it back then than it is now, but we still do have those type provisions in the bills that are starting in the House. Yes, ma'am.
Again, all of the bills passed unanimously in both the House and Senate. They'll now switch chambers and be in committee next week, with possible final passage next Thursday. The Senate also passed legislation aimed at updating Alabama's adoption laws to streamline the process while also ensuring protections for children and families. House Bill 101 from State Representative Jenny Shaver was amended in the Senate to allow prospective foster parents to apply for an exemption to vaccination requirements at the Department of Human Resources. The bill then passed the Senate, went back to the House, and received final passage.
The biggest impediment is in the process of terminating parental rights, and we certainly want to protect parents' rights. But it does take a lot of time. This shaves off a little bit of time in that process because we have over 5,700 children in foster care in Alabama, and on average they spend 2 years or longer, and that's a long time in the life and development of a child. So shaving off the time there, and also speeding up the court processes, allowing the courts to communicate with each other, and protecting the confidentiality of the documents involved, and just clarifying which court is in the process, and it just all through that process.
Alabama prosecutors are advocating for a package of bills they say will help them fight crime. Addressing the fentanyl crisis and cracking down on retail theft are among the top priorities. District attorneys say Alabama's Class D felony law, passed back in 2015, proliferates retail theft and undermines diversion programs.
Most of the time, communities will rally around our children, right? We can put aside our differences, and we can rally around our children. Well, I can tell you in Alabama this year, we've had to use naloxone 15 times in our high schools already. So if that's not an alarming step for you to take, I don't know what is. People are dying at staggering numbers. And it's really an evolution of drugs and drug abuse and drug distribution, because they all work hand in hand.
In North Alabama, this store owner was taking in stolen merchandise from throughout the state and neighboring state, with crews of thieves working for him. He was selling this merchandise both in his store and online. Over the course of just 1 year, he did over $2 million in retail sales through one e-commerce platform. Working closely with our law enforcement partners behind us at both a federal, state, and local level, along with our peer retailers, we were able to close that investigation, effect multiple arrests, and also through the course of the investigation, we discovered that he was also manufacturing and illegally selling firearms parts.
It was Higher Ed Day here at the State House. More than 1,000 students, faculty, and administrators from the state's public colleges and universities gathered for the annual parade, rally, and lunch program. The events are meant to build support for higher education by communicating the value of Alabama's colleges. Several legislative leaders were invited to address the crowd, but it was Governor Kay Ivey that got the students really excited, and she was excited too.
Our colleges and universities are a major part of who we are as Alabamians. They motivate us to step out of our comfort zone. They prepare us to be leaders, and they provide us with plenty of opportunities for success. You just have to act. My time on the plains allowed me for immense personal and academic growth, preparing me to be the individual that I am today. All but inspired my love for public service and pushed me to be a good learner as I could be. And I encourage each of you, our students here today, to continue to keep up their hard work of being great learners.
Coming up next, I'll sit down with State Senator Mericka Coleman to discuss her grocery tax proposal, her red flag gun safety bill, and other topics of interest. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Joining me next is State Senator Mericka Coleman from Pleasant Grove. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. I'm so impressed that you didn't call me representative.
Well, it's true. I think the last time we had you on, you had just gotten elected, but maybe hadn't taken office yet.
I still had a primary, so I was not elected. I had won the primary.
Right.
I mean, excuse me, still had the general election going on. So this is my first interview with you as a senator.
As a senator, yeah.
Yes.
Has it been interesting in the building, just sort of being in a different chamber?
It has been. Upstairs, to me, it's a little bit more formal. When folks are walking through the hallways, people have asked me, was it easy for you to get used to it? And I said it was, because everywhere I was walking, folks were like, Senator, 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 but just a little bit more formal, small group.
The House of Lords, they call it.
Oh.
But I get it. It is different. It's a different vibe.
Camaraderie is different. I feel like in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans do a better job, from what I've seen thus far, of trying to work things out on the front end and not having to have all of those battles on the floor.
I was talking to Senator Hatcher this week. He said the exact same thing. And y'all have similar experience, coming from the House to the Senate. Well, I wanted to talk about this grocery tax proposal. You've got a bill coming, not quite filed yet.
Not quite filed. I was hoping to file it this week, but it's not ready yet.
But this is interesting, because if you'd have asked me 5 months ago or last year, anytime, that the grocery tax sales tax cut would be maybe the most talked about issue of the session and actually have a real chance of passing.
Right.
I don't know if I'd have believed you. So here we are, and it seems to have a lot of momentum.
It really does. The bill that I'm carrying is actually modeled off of former Representative John Knight, who was the first, since I've served, and I've been here 20 years, to propose removing sales tax from food. And when we were doing it all of those years ago, it was a Democratic issue. And so now I'm very excited that folks on both sides of the aisle see the need in the state of Alabama to help our families by removing the state portion of sales tax from food.
And so if it's Mr. Knight's old bill, or at least based on that, then you are going for the revenue replacement. That's kind of been the bugaboo.
Well, that has been it. Even when he first had it, it didn't have the replacement funds.
Okay, which is why it didn't pass, right?
Exactly. But, in his genius, can you remember, he was the general fund budget chairman at that time, and working with our great financiers here in the state of Alabama, came up with a way that it would be revenue neutral, so you wouldn't be taking money away from the education trust fund budget, because right now that 4% puts up to $500 million in the ETF. And it would be irresponsible for any of us to take money away from the education trust fund budget when our kids in the state of Alabama not only have to compete with other kids in the U.S., but they're having to compete globally.
But by doing, I guess you would remove the federal income tax deduction?
Yes, that's exactly, because we are Alabama's the only state that allows that complete state income tax deduction for federal taxes paid. We're the only one that does that.
But this is a Republican legislature, so I wonder how your Republican colleagues are going to take that, because it could be considered a tax increase, and they're typically averse to tax increases.
I think you have to take it also to the public. If this bill passed, my version passed, it is a constitutional amendment. So our folks will have an opportunity to let people know, do they want to have $600 more a year every year because we remove that state income tax deduction? And anybody who is directly impacted, I want folks to know this. unless you make $150,000 or more, you won't feel any hurt at all, if you want to put it that way, when it comes from losing this deduction. You and I probably will, be harmed by it or feel a little bit of burn. But I mean, the way I was groomed, I'm a social justice type person. I feel like you do what's best for the most people in the state of Alabama. And giving them an additional $600 a year to spend on food or medicine or even amenities, I think our folks would enjoy that more than that actual tax deduction.
Well, I'm really eager to see where this goes, because you're going to have like half a dozen of these proposals and different, it's just differences in what counts as groceries. WIC versus SNAP and all that. Is yours based on SNAP?
Well, I have not seen the final version of what it's going to end up looking like
at
this point.
I was talking with Representative McClammy, and hers is based on SNAP, which is a more generous. What kind of groceries you can buy.
What is considered groceries, yes.
Right, whereas WIC is a lot more restrictive, and I think that's what more of the Republicans, I think Mr. Garrett and Mr. Orr are after. So it's going to be a lot of sausage making as this
It really
goes through
is, but what I love about it, because you have these different versions out there now, that it forces us also to have a conversation, because at the end of the day, all of us have the same goal, which is to remove that state portion of the sales tax from food. So I have been elected, this is another public announcement, as the Legislative Black Caucus chair. So that's both the House and the Senate. So I got a message yesterday that the Lieutenant Governor wanted to come in and talk to the Black Caucus, listen to this, about removing sales tax from food. So it is, an amazing time right now that both D's and R's know that this is something that has to happen or will be helpful to the people of the state of Alabama. So I'm excited about it. Now, actually, although I want my version to pass, I definitely will support all of the versions out there that will be helpful to the state.
Switching gears, I was talking with prosecutors earlier this week. Darryl Bailey, who's the DA here in Montgomery, and also Barry Matson, who represents all the district
very well.
Because it was the day of the Louisville shooting, and of course we had the Nashville shooting.
Yes.
So it's in the news. I asked them about these red flag laws. You've got legislation to do this. Ask them, essentially, would it give prosecutors, more of a tool to prevent these kind of things? And I don't want to, make it act like it's a one size fits all kind of thing.
The answer to combating all shootings.
I was trying to avoid the idiom of silver bullet, but. You've got a red flag proposal. Walk me through what it would do.
Yeah, so I've had a bill now for several years. And what it does, in essence, it gives law enforcement a tool that they can use to remove guns from a person who shows that they are a threat to themselves or others. Now, the original version of the bill that I had as a reporting entity, including a family member, school personnel, somebody in the healthcare field, as well as law enforcement. Some of my colleagues had an issue with the family portion, and they had a valid issue. They say, what if somebody uses it in a punitive way? So we actually took that portion out. And I'm willing to sit down with anybody to have discussions about what a red flag type bill should look like. I don't want the state of Alabama and Governor Ivey to have to end up coming out after a school shooting has happened, like the governor of Tennessee, who now is saying he does support some type of red flag piece of legislation. But that's as a result of 3 9-year-olds being killed, 3 educators being killed, and all of them being killed on the same day by a shooter with an AR-15, when they were just simply trying to be educated and doing their job. And so now, as a result of all of those folks coming to the Capitol and protesting and saying we no longer can just accept thoughts and prayers, Governor, state legislature, this has been the response. And so I don't want us in Alabama to have to respond to a mass shooting before we do something. Let's come to the table and let's talk about it. And let me add this point too. I had somebody to come to visit me from the Administrative Office of the Courts, because I've always said, hey, come talk to me. And they said, look, we'd like to sit down with you also. And so we put together a committee of judges, some DAs, circuit clerks, and we will all sit down together and talk about what a bill needs to look like. Again, I've always been the person to say, let's get something done. I mean, right now, we're actually looking at the PFA statute. So we'll see if it marries to the PFA statute,
What's the PFA?
Protection from abuse.
Okay.
And
domestic
statute,
violence
yes, to see if we can get something in that, if it marries better there, and instead of a standalone bill. And that will end up being the discussion that I'll have with these judges. So it won't just be Mericka Coleman. It will be, judges, like I said, circuit clerks, DAs, and I'm going to extend an invitation publicly now to our state auditor, Auditor Sorrells, who has actually been very open and very vocal on this issue. I'd love for him to sit down at the tables with me as well, and any of our gun groups. We would love to sit down at the table with you as well, because I'm a gun owner myself. I don't want anybody to take my guns away from me, but I also want to be able to remove guns from people who don't need to have them.
All right. And as the prosecutors have said, and you've noted this too, the devil's in the details.
Yes.
Because when it comes to removing a weapon, I'm sure there could be plenty of examples of course, but there are certainly going to be times when maybe it's a fine line, a gray area, and
Sure.
and that's when you run into Second Amendment, Eighth Amendment problems.
Well, there's been lots of studies that actually have been done on red flag bills, and they all have come back and said that it does not infringe on a person's Second Amendment right. And I want to bring this point up too, because we talk about mass shootings. Red flag bills, or ERPO bills, extreme risk protection orders, have also been used to remove guns from someone who is suicidal.
Right. I think it's
In
kind
the
of how they
Louisville,
started.
right? If you remember, if you've read a lot about the Louisville situation, that young man had actually reported to a friend. It just was too late, that he was going to the bank, and he was feeling suicidal. And so we want to make sure that in those situations as well, that families have a tool, or people have a tool, to remove those guns from someone who is feeling suicidal. Maybe having that additional time to reflect, that additional time to see their healthcare provider will save their life as well.
People forget sometimes that suicide is the #1 gun deaths
Yes.
in the country. Switching gears, I wanted to ask you about this driver's license suspension law. You were a co-sponsor or a sponsor of this last year.
Yeah.
Got through the Senate, almost got through the House, but sorted out at the last minute. Senator Barfoot has his bill in the Senate. It passed committee yesterday, and essentially this is restricting the state, limiting the state's ability to suspend driver's licenses for non-driving offenses.
Right.
Failure to appear, failure to pay parking tickets, up to a certain amount. Now that it's moving sort of early in the session, are you hopeful that this is actually going to happen?
Definitely more hopeful, but let me clarify one piece of it. It does not remove the provision when it comes to child support.
Okay.
We wanted to make sure that stayed in there. But yes, many of these folks are low-income people. Sometimes they move, and the courts don't have a current address, so you may not even know that you have a court date coming up. I've got a client right now that I had to call the court, and this is not on driver's license, but it happens. I had to call a municipal court to find out when our court date was, because I was never notified, nor was my client notified in writing. And so we don't want people's driver's license to be suspended for something like that, because again, you've got folks that need the driver's license in order to go to work. Also, now I represent the city of Brookside. And we know what happened last year, what was exposed last year, where it was almost, like a traffic trap, where people that were coming through, they were getting ticketed because the city itself was using a large portion of those fines and fees to go to their general fund. To run the city. So we do know stuff like that happens as well. And again, now, of course, they're cleaning up their act, new leadership there. I want to make sure I clarify that piece. But we don't want those kinds of things to prevent people from having their driver's license and getting to work, getting to school. But also you need ID to be able to, get a place to live. And so that's why, and again, it's bipartisan. It's easier in this body when you have bipartisan legislation for it to pass, and early enough now for whomever, whether it's the DA's Association that has an issue, the Attorney General's office that has an issue. There's plenty of time right now in this session to get those things worked out.
Yeah, I think, and Aaliyah, same thing. I think they were, concerned that, you're taking away a tool of enforcement. But I think, at least in Barfoot's bill, you get up to 2 failure to appear, up to 6 unpaid.
That's right.
So there is a limit.
Correct.
And but it's not just automatic, which I
Right.
think might be more palatable to
And
law
that was
enforcement.
a great addition to the bill. And that's what happens when you sit down and you talk with folks.
Imagine that.
Right.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you, Senator, again for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. Last time I was talking about removing racist language from Alabama State Constitution. The voters of the state of Alabama agreed, and now we have the Alabama State Constitution of 2022.
You're right, and it passed overwhelmingly.
Overwhelmingly.
That was-
Very
that was
excited
important. So
about
congratulations
that.
on
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night with our Week in Review show at 7:30 right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.